That's a good question. I hear some version of it relatively often, and I think what I would say about that is this. Whatever one might think about the role of a superpower in the 21st century, the United States remains, I think, what some have called the indispensable nation. And what do I mean by that? I mean, when there's a problem, people look to the United States to try to solve it. When there's an opportunity, people look to the United States to try and help take advantage of it. So whether it was leadership in fighting and defeating Ebola, leading and putting together the coalition to fight against ISIS, leadership in trying to prevent Iran from gaining nuclear weapons, leadership on climate change, people look to the United States. Now the fact is, we may not always get it right. But we're trying, and there are very few examples that I can think of in history of a time when the United States stayed out and good things happened. Exactly the opposite. If you think of the tragic genocide in Rwanda, for example, I think that's a real shame. The United States, which had an opportunity perhaps to get involved and do some good there, didn't. So I think we're going to keep playing a large role in the world, with the idea that, especially by building alliances and partnerships, we can advance not only our interests, but also our values. So this is a reference to my visit to a mosque about 2 weeks ago, an Islamic foundation. And I'm actually very proud of having paid that visit. You know, this is a community center that was vandalized, that was threatened. The leader of this Islamic foundation, who has lived in this country for 20 years, has spoken out forcefully denouncing terrorism, calling for respect, calling for tolerance, and stating that Islam is and should be a religion of peace. It is standard practice for American ambassadors to reach out to people of all faiths. You know, 2 days before I went to that mosque, I visited a synagogue. No news coverage. I've been to countless churches. But I think to reach out, especially as a representative of the most powerful country on earth, to a community that is frightened and feels threatened, is a positive thing. And I was very encouraged by the discussions we had, which centered in many ways, and I think this is important to remember, especially today, on how we, and in particular he and his community, can reach out to their young people to try and prevent radicalization, prevent extremism, and make sure that they continue to feel like they have a stake in being integrated citizens here in the Czech Republic. So I think it was a great visit. That's another question worth unpacking, because I think what it refers to, at least when I've seen sometimes on the internet claims like this, some of the activities we've undertaken dealing with corruption, trying to partner with NGOs or the government to fight corruption, protection of human rights, so the LGBT community, the Roma, religious minorities, and speaking out about other issues that are of concern to us. And that, again, is something that American diplomats do, and I reject the suggestion that it's meddling. And first of all, on on every one of these issues, we have solid partners both in the government and among NGOs who want to work on corruption, who want to work towards greater tolerance, greater inclusion of the Roma. And I have to wonder why people are pushing back and say, those who feel that this is meddling need to look inside themselves and ask what's to ask that question. Let me add one other thing. You know, the EU's ambassador to the United States recently issued a statement calling on the United States to abolish the death penalty. Nobody freaked out. Nobody said, what are you doing meddling in our affairs. The French ambassador to the United States, who is a charming man and very active on Twitter, regularly tweets about gun violence in the United States, U.S. politics, U.S. candidates. Nobody loses their minds. This is what diplomats do, and I think that our partners in the government, in NGOs, and those who have self-confidence about the strength of the Czech Republic recognize what we are doing, which is an effort to work with our friends to help make their country stronger on issues that we both care about. You know, I understand, and I think Washington understands, that President Zeman is the elected head of state here, but most of our day-to-day dealings are with the government. And my relations with President Zeman, I hope, are fine. I've been to the castle on a number of occasions for ceremonial events in the last year. I assume that's going to continue. I want to have great relations with all leaders in the Czech Republic, and that includes the president. This is a marvelous country, and I am, every day, I am struck by the intelligence, the humor, the dedication of the people I meet who are working to make this a better country. And it's hard for me to think of something that I would ask the Czechs to do better, other than maybe I would encourage you to have even more confidence in your ability to be a player on the world stage. It's not good for the world when, for example, I think when the United States is weak or turns inward and not engaged, and I think the same goes for the Czech Republic, because this country, with its legacy of support for human rights, advocacy for democracy, and with the lessons it learned in the last century, which are in many ways the story of the last century, can be a leader on the world stage. And I think more and more that's happening, both contributing to the fight against ISIS, as a NATO partner in the EU, but I would encourage the Czech Republic to be as engaged as possible in world affairs. It's hard for me to judge. I would say that in all of our societies, it's 100% true in the United States, we still have a way to go, whether you're talking about casual sexism, which is people making inappropriate jokes or comments that sometimes unconsciously or not intentionally, that leave women feeling excluded or not valued, or whether it's something broader about if you're talking about women's participation in the economy, in the government. I don't think I can say that there's a strong difference between what I see in the United States, many other European countries, and here. We all need to work on this issue. I'm pleased to say my wife, Tamar Neuberger, has brought together a series of meetings, including women from business, women in government, women in tech, Czech women, to share ideas and talk about how best to advance the causes of equality and fighting sexism. And she's met some magnificent people who are doing great work here. Well, one thing that has surprised me, and this is a pleasant surprise, is the extent to which people care about the views of the United States and the extent to which they know about things that are happening in my country. You know, the questions you asked at the beginning of this session that people sent in about Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, it's been remarkable for me to see the level of knowledge and expertise that Czech audiences bring to what I might have thought are domestic topics. I've also been surprised, I suppose, by the way in which personal relationships matter and can be helpful in politics and diplomacy. The diplomatic corps here, for example, other ambassadors, turns out to be a very warm and friendly group, and many of them have become friends who will be great friends for many years, but that makes it much easier to pick up the phone and say, what do you think about this issue? How can we work together to work on this cause or that cause? I always wanted to be an ambassador. You know, I was a lawyer prior to doing this, and when I was a child, I think the things that attracted me about law were the idea that simply by using arguments, by trying to persuade a decision maker, you could actually have a real impact on the life of an individual or the fate of a company or the condition of a group. So I think that always appealed to me, and it turns out that in my current job as an ambassador, many of those same traits or skills are important. Trying to be persuasive, trying to reach out to audiences, trying to listen as much as to speak. That's important as a lawyer too, and certainly as an ambassador. Some people know my mother was born in Prague in 1934. The family barely got out when she was a 5-year-old girl, and the United States took them in. Essentially saved her life, because as a Jewish family, she almost certainly would have met the same fate that almost all of her relatives who were left behind did, which is end up in Auschwitz or Treblinka and be murdered because of the group that they belong to. I mean, I will say that does affect the way I view current events in the world as the child of, as my mom used to say, a stick pulled from the fire. It's hard not to have some sympathy for people who are also find themselves in danger and are seeking shelter. Now, on my father's side, because people don't ask about that as often, on my mom's side, her family had been born here and originally in Rokycany. My grandfather came from Ukraine as a young boy to Prague. On my father's side, there were a couple generations of Americans. My father was born in Baltimore. He was a pediatrician. His father was a pharmacist in Baltimore, and the generation before that came over from Europe, and we're not exactly sure where they were from. Somewhere Poland, Russia, I've even heard Austria. Someday I'll need to go back and look at that. I will say there's so many things I like about Prague, but I never get tired of the views and the scenery. And when I am riding to work, I look out the window, and whether it is a sunny day or a cloudy day, whether it is snowy or rainy, sometimes I just have to pinch myself and say, is this actually where I am living and working? It never gets old. It never gets tired. And then, of course, the people. There is a level of energy here that is remarkable. However, I don't want people who are not in Prague to feel that we're being neglectful in any way. I'm very proud of the fact that in my first year here in the Czech Republic, I visited all 14 kraje in the Czech Republic. And so I've had a chance to see not just the capital, but the rest of the country, from Ostrava to Ústí, from Pilsen to Brno, and pretty much everywhere in between. When I was in college, I enjoyed very much reading the translated works of Milan Kundera, especially The Joke and The Unbearable Lightness of Being. So I would probably list those as Czech authors, Czech books that I've enjoyed. As an American book, there's a terrific book that I would recommend to all of these viewers called Robert Kennedy and His Times. It's by Arthur Schlesinger. Schlesinger was a speechwriter and then a historian who wrote about the Kennedys. And Robert Kennedy, John Kennedy's youngest brother, who sadly was assassinated in 1968, was a remarkable, heroic figure. And what's especially striking about him was his empathy for the poor, for the discriminated against, for the weakest in our society. It's a great book. Go out and buy it. It's long, but it's a fast read. Thanks for following us, and I hope we'll have a chance to do this again sometime soon.